Hey, my name's Shanshan. I sell art on shanshan.co. Today we're going to review Top Gun Maverick, aka Top Gun 2. Directed by Joseph Kosinski. Time is 2 hours and 11 minutes, which is a little longer than I like. I like the 1 hour and a half, but some action films take longer. I think it's okay here because the action just way over the top in the film, so you never get the sense of being bored in the film at all. So, but I definitely wouldn't drink a Coke going in this. Popcorn only, guys. You'll die otherwise. Actors are Tom Cruise as Captain Pete Mitchell, Maverick. Val Kilmer comes back as Iceman. Miles Teller plays Lieutenant Bradley Rooster Bradshaw, who's the son of Goose. Jennifer Connelly plays Penny Benjamin, the love interest of Maverick. Bashir Salahuddin plays Hondo, one of the other pilots. And there's several other pilots, but I'm just cutting it short. So Maverick, he's in a test experimental jet, and they're about to cut the whole program because it's too expensive, and they're not meeting their goal of they're only going to do Mach 9. He's like, fine, we'll take it to Mach 10 when the guy shows up. Takes it to Mach 10, and then he's like, let me go to Mach 10.2, 10.3, and then the plane blows up. Maverick luckily survives, but he saves the program, but then they're all pissed at him again. And they're like, hey, we need you back at Top Gun. He's like, Top Gun again? I was terrible as an instructor, right? So they send him back to Top Gun. He's got this special mission. So they're retraining. The Top Gun pilots are already Top Gun. So it's kind of Top Gun squared, basically. Their mission is to take out this nuclear plant that's being developed underground. And that's the crux of the story. So analysis are they have really great stunts in here, really great CGI. But I think a lot of it's done with real jets, real airplanes. So you really get to see the live action sequences. Probably there's a lot of CGI in here too, but it looks pretty real. Just mind-blowingly like killer stunts here. You're going to see it. You're going to just be like, holy crap, they're really flying planes, right? There's a lot of cool look of the inside of the planes in the cockpits from the F-14, F-18, World War II plane. Obviously, the newer jets, like the 5th generation planes, are only showing from the outside because that's, kind of secret information. You don't want the Chinese, the Russians to copy it, so obviously they're not going to show the inside of the cockpits of those jets. They do have some of the 5th generation jets in demonstrations, so you kind of see some of that new stuff, so it doesn't feel totally stodgy flying old F-18s, which are kind of like 1990s technology, maybe 1980s technology. There's a fun replay of the Maverick love affair where he's left and come back, and it's a different love interest, but kind of similar to the original drill instructor, but instead of being a drill instructor, she owns one of the bars where they first kind of jammed out together. Play, you got the love and feeling. So it's kind of, they toned it back a little bit on the love interest because he's in his 50s, so, I guess in a lot of films they don't really shoot actors in their 50s in a really action sequence of a love affair because they're going to show the wrinkles and how they're out of shape and whatever. They're not 20 something, right? So they cut that back, but they do supposedly have sex, so that's kind of fun. I always wondered like if Kelly McGinnis wasn't around for it, but I guess from what I've seen online, she's just not in shape. She's like way out of shape. She didn't age well, basically. She actually looks like in her 50s, like Tom Cruise still kind of holding on to like a 40s kind of look almost with some wrinkles, but he's looking good for his age, whereas Kelly McGinnis hasn't aged well. So it would have been probably too much for her to get back in shape and look sexy. So they had to use someone younger, but she has a little bit of wrinkles, so it's kind of believable. I don't think they used an unrealistic actress for that, which I really appreciated. They could have used someone in their 20s, but they used someone in their 30s, so it kind of looks more realistic. Obviously, Tom Cruise can date someone in their 20s without an issue, but as far as in the film, being a pilot, you just wouldn't have that much. You're a Navy pilot. You're not making like killer money like a superstar. So it makes more sense that you'd be dating someone in 30s, 40s, right? So that kind of comes together well. There's this good drama between Goose's son. He's also a Top Gun pilot, but he has this really bitter grudge against Maverick from his father dying when he was flying with Maverick, as well as Maverick kind of prevented him from going to school for 4 years, held him back, so he wasn't able to go to Top Gun right away, so he was pissed. But secretly, it was the mother that was asked Maverick to hold him back, but he didn't want her son to hate her mother, so he just took the blame for it. So it's kind of a cool wrinkle into the Maverick, but he's trying to bridge that stepfather feel for Goose's son, and he's really struggling with that, and Goose's son just has this total grudge against him and really doesn't want to fly with him, and then they're forced to at the end. The only major downside I'd say to this movie would be the enemy's generic. You never know if it's North Korea, you don't know if it's China, you don't know if it's Russian. They just have some mysterious logo on it. Maybe it's Japanese, like Japanese or U.S. allies, so it doesn't make any sense. The only ally that would have made sense in the film would have been, as far as building like a nuclear thing underground, that ties carefully into North Korea, but China as well Russia really isn't known for building underground nuclear plants. They just build them openly, and then whatever, they got enough nukes, they can just take out anyone. So they don't really have to necessarily build their nuclear plants underground. They might have the bunkers underground and the missiles underground maybe, but they don't have the whole nuclear facility underground. North Korea definitely would, because they're a much smaller power. So it would have made more sense maybe in a North Korea. So I don't know why they didn't use North Korea. I mean, the film's not going to be shown in North Korea, so I don't see the danger of showing North Korea as the enemy. But probably the more believable enemy in the film, because they do use 5th generation airplanes. So for the crux of the story, when they're going in the airplane, the enemy has, F-14s, F-18s, and has old, and the 5th generation airplane. Would have made more sense China or Russia, right? So that would have made more sense, but then why would it be an underground nuclear bunker? That kind of doesn't make sense. And that's because they use this generic enemy. I think China probably would have had the most sense, but now that Russia's kind of having a war in Europe, it would have been great if it had been Russia as well, since they have a huge embargo, but probably they were hoping to sell a lot into Russia, but now maybe that's out the window, who knows. But I think it'll still sell well in Russia and in China. But it was kind of stupid to have this generic enemy. So that's a really weak point, because Hollywood's trying to pitch to sell all over the world, which is fine, it makes sense, but it's like, you're promoting the U.S. Navy. Shouldn't you show the real enemies of the U.S.? Like, it's so pussy-ass, shit. Like, you do all the shit of learning how to fly jets, learning how to fly planes, da-da-da-da, and then you're afraid to fucking piss off China or Russia. You're like, it's a film, guys. And it's like, I don't know. There's plenty of Russian films or Chinese films that are propaganda, so it's like, it's okay if the U.S. does a propaganda film once in a while, right? And it's still kind of a propaganda film anyway, so I don't know why they would cut that out. So that seems kind of hokey, I would say. Just like selling out to sell more tickets. So, but it is what it is. China's a huge market now, and they weren't a big market in the 80s when the original Top Gun came out. And there was a lot of other like anti-China, anti-Russia films at the time, and those markets were very small at the time. So now those markets are much bigger, well-developed. They sell a lot of cinema in both countries, so it probably makes sense not to piss them off. So that's why that's generic, but it just doesn't make any sense. If it's a U.S. Navy, they got to fight a real enemy. They can't fight a generic aliens or something. Unless it's Independence Day, but it's not Independence Day. They're fighting a real country, so it just doesn't make any sense. There's a nice cameo of Iceman in the film. He's in there briefly, but he's not in good shape as well as he could be. He's dying, and then... So that's kind of a nice part, because you see kind of that mortality touch of pilots in the film. And Cruise looks pretty physically fit for the film, so it's believable that he will fly. However, if you look at the real reality of the U.S. Navy, I think they probably cut at 30, unless they were if they were like, say it was Vietnam and they're going through pilots, they probably would use their older 40s age pilots. I don't think they would use the 50s age pilots. Those guys usually transition to commercial air fighters afterwards. So realistically, if you wanted to remain a pilot, he would have been United. He would have been working for United or Delta by now, Which is funny, because there was a film with Tom Cruise as an airline flight that gets involved with drug trade, but that's another fun film to see. But so the realistic version is Maverick wouldn't exist in his 50s. So ideally, this film would have made like 10, 15 years ago when he was in his 30s, 40s, and it'd be like, all right, that's still possible. He might still be a pilot, kind of unrealistic, but because when you get to the age limit of the Navy pilots, you probably want to be higher up the ranks. It wouldn't make sense to remain as captain as it is in the film. So that's a little bit unrealistic, but, Tom Cruise still looks pretty good, and he's believable as a pilot, and he can actually still fly these planes. So it's just, if you can actually physically do it as an actor, then it's fine in a film, right? Just for the reality, it wouldn't make sense, but, it's fun to inspire people, I think, so it's a great film from that aspect. I'm thinking maybe in the film that one of the students should have died, because, like, if you see in the original Top Gun, one of the Goose obviously dies, and that was a huge kind of, like, suck you in the movie, and it also kind of cements the real reality of being a pilot. It's extremely dangerous. You can get shot down, and they do have a great dogfight scene in the film, which is way better than the first Top Gun. I think the first Top Gun, they just kind of used some clips over and over again, and they didn't have much to work with, because probably the Navy didn't want to spend much money on it, so they only gave them a couple promo shots. It also would have been nice if they had used MiGs, I think, because it would make more sense that the Russians and the Chinese had MiGs, not F-18s. If they have F-18s and F-14s, then they're a U.S. ally or maybe a Middle Eastern power, but I don't think they'd ever challenge the U.S., so it doesn't make any sense, in that sense, because it is obviously Chinese or Russian territory that they're flying over as far as the terrain, so it's obviously not the Middle East, so you're like, again, that really hole in the plot where you use a fake enemy versus a real enemy. They used some of the sets and scenes from the original Top Gun, but I think they just used just enough to kind of give it a little bit of nostalgia for the films, like the great Porsche and the motorcycle. They didn't have the chase scene, but they have the great Porsche sitting outside that same exact house they had in the original Top Gun, so you have that connection directly to the film. You have banter at the bar, which is the same bar that they were at in the original film. You got the kid, he's playing the same song that Tom Cruise and Goose played on the piano, so that was really fun. And the beginning of the film, I think they start out with some of the 80s classics, and later they don't really use that music. So that's a little strange, I think. They could have used more of the 80s music, I think, in the end of the film. I think the music would have been fine, but I guess they had to change it up and use more modern music, I guess. So I don't know how I feel about that. I think it's cool, but then I'm like, if you're going to use 80 music in the beginning, why not use 80 music through it? But maybe that wouldn't have sunk in with the newer audiences now that are in their 20s, 30s versus me, who I saw it when I was younger. Maybe it's just to make it more modern. I know in The Matrix 4, they used way too much nostalgia, and they just kind of gutted Matrix 1 and just reused scene after scene after scene, and it was just really crap. So you can only use so much from the first film, so you just want to use enough to kind of give a little bit of the nostalgia, but then you want to set the film on its own. And I think they did a pretty good job here, because they did Maverick as a test pilot, an experimental jet, and then he transitioned to Top Gun to kind of, continue the plot of Top Gun original, right? So I think they did a pretty good job there, and they had newer jets, older jets. They sneak onto the base and steal an older jet and all this stuff, so it's really fun about all the different jets they fly, which is way more than they did in the first one, so they just went way over the top of what they could do. And I don't think it was as much. There was some of it CGI probably, but they used a lot of the real jets, you can really tell. So that makes a huge difference, I think. And it's just really cool to see all those U.S. Navy jets in different generations used here. They have the F-14, F-18, they have the 5th generation. So they have like 3 generations there. Not everything, but a little sliver of the Navy. Navy actually probably has 50 planes, and so they kind of reduced it to what would be dogfight planes, and then they might have these 5th generation planes, because if you think about it, there's also planes that are specifically for long range bombing and nuclear planes that carry nuclear bombs, those kind of planes. So those can be very different, and they have kind of multiple layers, but they kind of boil it down to these simple templates, which I'm fine with. I mean, most average person doesn't know that much about jets, so that's good enough to just have those 3 jets. And they have a World War II plane in the end, so that's really fun, kind of a joyride in it, and that was really cool. And Tom Cruise is flying all 3 of them, so you're like, holy shit. I don't know if he's flying the experimental jet. I think probably not there, but obviously the other planes he's definitely flying, so it's pretty cool. They probably slowed it down. I can't imagine he's doing the real G's that is claimed in the film, but it's as close as possible to what the real G's would have been at those extreme sequences of the plane. So I think they did a really great job there. And yeah, just a really overall great film that's great to see in the cinema. This is a type of action film you really look forward to in the cinema, and there really hasn't been. The only thing that's been this cool probably is latestly has probably been Dune. That was really cool as well, or some of the Star Wars films. So it's been a while since there's been a really great action film that really plays well in the cinema versus at home on your TV. So I'd encourage you guys to see it in the cinema. It's probably a good collector one, because it'll be fun to watch again, especially the original Top Gun. I'll obviously buy that and buy this one too. So I'd include that. There's other great films that are similar, like in the 80s there was Firefox with Clint Eastwood, which is kick-ass. Obviously the CGI is kind of sucky in there, but it's a really great fighter jet plane movie, and there's several other fighter jet planes, but I think these are some of the best films out there. So go guys, see it, and if you'd like to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.